Today, I want to talk about the deep state. Not the phrase deep state, but the concept. Who invented it? Is there such thing? Or is it all a bit of a conspiracy? And if somebody did invent this, what's his name? Where did he live? How come nobody has ever heard about him? So let me introduce you to a great thinker and a philosopher and a man who really believed that he was doing good. No conspiracy involved, no malintention. And his name was Antonio Gramsci. Now, Antonio Gramsci was a Marxist, socialist Marxist who lived in the 1920s, 1930s in Italy. And at the time in Italy, there was another Marxist who happened to be in charge of the country, and his name was Benito Mussolini. Now, Mussolini was also a socialist Marxist, but he took Marxism to a different place altogether. He believed in Marxism, which is coupled with nationalism, and his friend Adolf Hitler was also a Marxist, and he believed in nationalism and Marxism, but also racism. So at the time, there was many different schools of thought about Marxism and communism and socialism, and what really was the best way to implement that ideology. So naturally, people such as Mussolini didn't like people like Gramsci because they were competing for the same vote. They were both socialists and Marxists, but they have different ideology. And the same thing happened in Germany with Adolf Hitler. This is why he went for all the communists, because they essentially believed in the same principles of Karl Marx, but they had different ideas of how those principles should be implemented. So Mussolini doesn't particularly like Gramsci. So what does he do? He throws him in prison. And whilst in prison, Gramsci developed his thoughts about communism and socialism and Marxism, and he wrote them all down in little notebooks, which were later published. And you can find it in some second-hand bookshops, and it's called Selection from Prison Notebooks. And this is where the deep state is first documented, the concept of the deep state. So Gramsci figured out that in democracies, people were very unlikely to vote for socialism. And the reason for this, in his view at least, wasn't that socialism went against human nature, but he believed that people will not vote for socialism because they were almost brainwashed in favor of capitalism. It was that simple. And therefore, there is an inherent bias in people's minds, and they just simply don't see the light. And the best way to persuade the public to adopt and embrace socialism is by re-educating them, almost reprogramming people's minds. So they no longer believe that capitalism is the best ideology to move forward with. And rather they learn to adopt, love, and cherish socialism. And this is where the idea of the deep state kicks in. So according to Gramsci, all that was needed was a change of culture. So he advocated for socialists take over the institutions of the state, and through those institutions, whilst the institutions working together, supporting one another, begin the process of re-educating people. So if you take over the education, the media, the judiciary, if you take control over the family, if you take control over the language, if you put socialist people in those positions of influence, they will be able in an orchestrated way to reprogram the public's mind in favor of socialism. Take, for example, education. Imagine that the child go to school, and in the school, teachers with the socialist values teach the child, and then the child goes home and he brings home those values, and then the parents go to church, and then in church they receive similar values, and then in the media you hear about similar things, and the scientists are saying the same things, and there is a coordinated approach to advocate the benefits of socialist values. But that takes time, and Gramsci was a real visionary. It's important to understand that Gramsci didn't come to this from a position of a conspiracy or anything like that. He simply tried to work out a way to re-engineer so they end up making the right choice. And this is what happened. So over time, socialists were encouraged to take a place in the academia and the judiciary and the civil service in general, because bear in mind, the civil service stays there whilst governments keep changing all the time. And sometimes you hear people saying, well, there's no point voting because all parties appear to be doing pretty much the same thing. That's not quite right. So different parties, say the Conservatives or the Republican and the Democrat or Conservative and Labour parties, there are big differences between them. But where they are unable to operate is in a place where there are very strong forces that drive policy in one direction, whilst they may be trying to take the policy in a different direction, but they may find this to be impossible. So no matter how capitalist or how right-wing or how conservative a government is, ultimately they will be facing a brick wall in a way of a civil service, bureaucrats who play a major part in spreading socialist ideology without even being aware of how crucial their role is. And this is the reason why people sometimes asking, how come the academia is quite leaning towards the left? How come the BBC and Sky News and the majority of the newspapers and the press, and how come the judges seem to be coming from a similar kind of background in terms of ideology? And this is the answer. Now, the important thing about this is that once those positions are taken by people with socialist views, the system will simply perpetuate itself. So they will select the next generation. So they will do the recruitment and they will select the next generations and say the academics will encourage people with similar viewpoints to carry out research and progress in the academia. And so as in politics, so as in the judiciary. And of course, same thing is happening with the media and the press. So in Gramsci's view, this is more or less what the deep state look like. So you have the people who go to the ballot box and casting the vote, whilst at the same time there are multiple systems that work in a completely different direction. And sometimes we feel that the people in government, or we call them the bureaucracy, or institutions such as the BBC, they're completely disconnected from the people on the ground. And this is the reason for this, is that they are disconnected. They have formed what Gramsci calls hegemony, or an elite. And the role of this elite is to educate, is to govern de facto, and is to keep educating and re-educating the public with socialist values. If the people on the street keep receiving the same messages through all different media, they will be influenced by it. So you may ask, how come I never heard about this chap, Antonio Gramsci? And I think this is a very good question. It is something that we all need to ask ourselves. How come that Gramsci's ideology, which has been so influential and had such an impact on all of us, and still having a huge impact on the way we live our lives, on the system, on our belief systems, on the relationship we have with each other, relationship we had with the church or with the synagogue, and very few people ever heard that name. And yes, the deep state does exist, and it has taken nearly 100 years for Gramsci's vision and ideology to be implemented and spread all over the world, particularly among democracies. In this ideology, people didn't really know what to call it, so they call it a deep state, meaning a state within a state, which give it a bit of a sense of a conspiracy. But this is not a conspiracy theory. The idea of the deep state is something that is very well known, is very, very well established among socialist leaders. And it is, I believe, something that people need to know about and learn about and teach about and understand it, regardless of where you are politically.